Everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I have a special place in my heart for middle grades authors, elementary authors, and authors across the board. And I tend not to introduce people as authors for specific places in time because authorship is one of those things that just connects across the board. But delighted to be joined on this episode by author Gennifer Choldenko. May I call you Gennifer? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, all right. Thank you. So thanks for jumping on and talking with me. I appreciate the bookshelf behind you that is currently demonstrating some of the books that we'll be talking about as we have a conversation here. And we'll hat tip one or two things that you have coming up in the future as well.
Sounds good. Like everyone else, when the pandemic hit, my office became a Zoom room. So that's why it's set up the way it is.
I like it. I like it. You've got some nice balance there. And speaking of Zoom and the pandemic, one of the things that I did want to be sure to tell you is that I actually I have a life as a professor that I've lived and still engage in research and teaching of different kinds. But I talked with a teacher during the pandemic. This was 2021 when things were starting to get a little bit better, not quite as tense. And we were doing an interview, and one of the books that this teacher brought up that was a huge connecting point for her students online was Al Capone Does My Shirts.
Oh, that's good to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate your work. I appreciate the power of literature and how it connects people in person, but then also creating those communities online at different times is such a wonderful thing. So thank you for sharing that with the world.
Well, let's get going then.
All right, all right. So what was it about the written word? I almost said world because that's also the name of the podcast, but what was it about that world of writing that drew you in as maybe a young person? Maybe you could speak to that, and then also as now a professional author.
Well, my father was, he loved to write and he loved to read and he loved history. And so every night he always finished one book. He read really quickly. And he, after work, he was an executive, but he would come home from work and then he would slide in behind this big Underwood typewriter and clack, 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 clack. And what you do after a long, hard day of work really says, I think, who you are in a big way, because you have to really love something to come home and do it. And he was really religious about it. He wrote every day. So that kind of planted a seed that maybe writing was fun. And
Yeah.
I saw him reading, and he was always he asked me to find books that might make good movies. He was always trying to engage with me around books. And one of the high points of my childhood was when we got to go to Pickwick Books and pick out one book. And it was just so hard to pick out that one book. So I loved writing and I found it fun right from the beginning. My father had always wanted also to get published and had not, as a writer, had not been able to. So I saw both sides, the excitement of and the thrill and the joy of a literary life, but also how hard it was. So I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to go in that direction. But I graduated from college with a degree in English and American literature, and I really mostly it was creative writing. So it was coming out whether I liked it or not. And then I wrote, I needed to make a living, so I wrote advertising for a while. But I always knew that somehow I was a writer, and even if it just was advertising, it was a way to link words and get paid for it. And I love that process. I love the wordsmith process. My license plate is rewrites because that's how I work. So I decided after working for a while in advertising, because, that kind of, on the one hand, it was nice to be able to write for a living, and I actually learned a lot about copysmithing, as they called it there, and about the muscles that it takes to write, because you had to write for 8 hours a day, and I had not done that before. So that builds those writing muscles and the discipline of making deadlines. So it was helpful, but after a while, I just could not stand it anymore. So I was looking for a way out, and I thought, well, maybe I'll write for adults. But when I was writing in college, I always wrote for kids or teenagers, and I never wrote for adults. So I started writing for adults, and I didn't like it. I kind of put myself to sleep. And I thought, oh no, I'm a writer, but I don't like writing for adults. And I what am I going to do? So it's really a hard time in my life. But eventually, I don't know why I didn't figure it out earlier, but eventually I figured out that I wrote for kids. And that was like a huge moment, fireworks going off and trumpets blaring, because it just kind of made sense. And when I write for kids, I am so engaged, I don't fall asleep. I'm really, that was a time in my life that I remember so clearly, that when I write from the point of view of a kid, I just feel more alive than I do normally. So that's how I sort of, it was a longer story than that, because, it took me a while to really have the guts to pursue it. But finally I did. And I'm so grateful to the person that I was, that I went after it.
Yeah.
Because, it didn't look good. It is a hard road, and it wasn't sensible. And I am generally pretty sensible. But I went for it because I just needed to. And I've just, as I said, always been grateful to myself, to that person that I was back then, who was willing to go all out.
Yeah. I love that story of sort of finding your passions. And sometimes when I work with students, I think they have this impression that they're going to find the thing right away that they're just going to do. And sometimes it does take time, and sometimes you get kind of adjacent to the thing that you're doing. So I love that. And then I also picked up on the fact that you said that your father was interested in history, which is certainly something that shows up in your work, being an author who's known for historical fiction.
Yeah, and he also loved California history. So, and there's that's what I do. So I think more got imprinted than I thought.
There was some mentoring and passing of torches there that was happening as he was typing on that large keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to step into that youthful voice, because I imagine for writers that's probably one of the challenges of writing for children, is keeping it authentic and keeping it engaging in a way, and you have a skill and a voice for that.
Well, as I explained, I don't have a voice for adults.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I have to try to be 12. There's some part of me, and I personally believe that, there was a lot of really dynamic, unforgettable things that happened to me, and when I was at that age. So I remember it in a way that most people don't. If you don't have some of the trauma that I did, you go right through, and you don't remember what it was like to be 12, because it didn't imprint on your brain in the same way. So I don't try to write for kids. I just write that way.
The voice.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
It's very interesting to me too, that I often write from the point of view of a boy. I don't know where that came from, but that is really fun too. I was an adventurous girl, but there are a million adventurous girls. I also had a very feminine side. So I don't know why I write from a boy's point of view, except I think it has something to do with my brother, my big brother, who was really a big part of my life. And it was kind of a bit of a parent figure for me. And so I think about him a lot. So maybe that's it.
Yeah, I love that. Love the family connections and the way that comes to be. So your work's been a mainstay. The Alcatraz series is one of those that's really entered into popular culture and a go-to for teachers, probably a go-to on many teachers' shelves and for school libraries. Has there been a time, can you tell us about a time where maybe a young reader, a fan came up and connected with you and talked with you a little bit about, it could be that book or it could be another one as well, one of those positive reader experiences?
Well, happily, I've had a lot of really great experiences and interactions with readers. One of the things that surprises me and reminds me about how there is no one size fits all book, that different books connect with different people. And I've had a number of kids who literally went from, easy readers to Al Capone Does My Shirts, which seems to me to be too much of a jump. But for whatever reason, that book made them want to struggle with reading a harder, longer book. And so when kids come up to me and say that, I feel really gratified because, reading is such a joy in my life that I really, if I can write something that makes kids want to read, then, I'm, really feel like that's kind of the highest possible accolade. But the other thing that's interesting about the series is that the mom, especially in the first book, I'm kind of hard on the mom. And I was worried about whether I was going to get feedback from moms saying, God, we try so hard. And,
Right.
And so I really thought I was kind of preparing myself for that. But the opposite happened. So many moms reached out because they saw how hard that mom tried, even if she made a lot of mistakes. And they really identified with her. So I've gotten a lot of reader letters from moms. One of the best letters I got, though, was someone was an adult was trying to open a school for kids with autism, and they finally got the funding. And so they wrote a big "done" on the door, which is the last word in Al Capone Does My Shirts. And so that made me feel like that was great.
Nice reference there. Nice reference there. I love it. Yeah. And great that readers can connect with a character who has imperfections, all of those pieces that come together. I was going to mention something else from the first part of your response, but maybe it'll come back to me. I was going to talk about how sometimes you talked about like the easy reader jumping. Sometimes it's really, really good to encourage readers. And if they have a book that's maybe a little challenging, instead of saying, no, you can't have that, you're reading at whatever level. I just wanted to throw that out there for teachers as a great example of one of those instances where a reader will strive on through and have a really good experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Never underestimate desire. And if you get a kid wanting to do something, that is, then your battle's over and you just kind of get out of the way and let them go for it.
So what do you hope that readers take away? That could be a theme, it could be an experience, an emotion as they encounter your work.
Well, with Al Capone Does My Shirts and that whole series in particular, I was the sister of my sister had autism, and that was a long, long time ago when autism was hardly ever diagnosed and nobody knew what it was, and only people that had very pronounced cases got diagnosed. Now there's a whole spectrum. It's really a different diagnosis than it was then. And I had a hard time with her. I had all these conflicting feelings about her. I loved her, but sometimes I hated her. and sometimes I was jealous of her because she got so much attention.
Hmm.
And sometimes I felt terribly guilty about the fact that I was healthy in all ways. And she really struggled. The Natalie in the book is not nearly as involved, it doesn't have the same level of autism that my sister did. And
Hmm.
so I would have loved to have read a book about a sibling of a kid with autism or any kind of special needs, really, that it spoke to me, that made me
Yeah.
feel like it's normal to have all those feelings. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean you're a bad person if you sometimes dislike them, or or you sometimes shut down, or you try too hard. There was some writing that my father did about me as a kid and how I tried so hard to connect with my sister. I didn't know how, because I was younger, just as Moose is, and
Hmm.
my brother was older than she was, so he did better with her than I did because I was too young. But I tried so hard, and I think, if I could speak to kids who are going through that, then I feel like, I'm reaching out to the kid I was back then and telling them,
Yeah.
yeah, this is normal. This whole range of feelings, that's normal.
Yeah, books are such a great way to do that because kids don't always have those conversations, or sometimes those conversations are just too hard to get to, even if it's possible. So, books are a wonderful way for readers to connect that way.
Or they don't even really know. I mean, I don't think I could have
Mm-hmm.
articulated all of that when I was, 10,
Yeah,
11, 12. I don't think I could have. But if I saw it in a book, then it goes in really deeply. I mean, one of
yeah,
the reasons I love writing for kids is because I remember the books that I read as a kid, and I loved them so much. I love books I read now, just as we all do, but I don't own them and take them in that same deep way that I did when I was a kid.
yeah.
And so if anybody ever, any kid ever reads my book and feels the way I feel about some of the books that I read, that would just be amazing.
Yeah. Oh, um, well, you mentioned sort of some of that struggle of writing, and it's a very solitary process, but to get to share your ideas with the world, and to get to connect with readers, it's kind of the other side of it that gets to be beautiful.
And I like the process of writing.
Mm.
That is my favorite part. um And it's funny because for a while I was interested in, doing some visual art, but I couldn't do it because I got so lonely. And I
Yeah.
never get lonely when I write, because I'm getting fed in a deep way, and my
Hmm.
characters are so real. I feel like I've spent the day with these characters that I really care about.
It's really interesting to hear. Joyce Carol Oates talks about that experience because she's written, I don't know, 100 books or something at this point.
Or more. Yeah.
Yeah, and she talks about sort of being almost this transparent or glass-like person that is sort of just taking in the world when she writes. So it's really this way of capturing voices and noticing things and bringing all of that into the page.
Yeah, sometimes when I do, writing workshops for kids, I try and do something really simple, like, go outside, take off your shoes, walk through the grass, and then write about walking through the grass. Write about the smells and the feeling and the sound of it, and all of those minute kind of sensory impressions that you have.
Yeah.
Because if you write about it, then all of a sudden you will have experienced that walking through the grass in your bare feet more intensely, because you have to, because you're paying attention. and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that really feels great.
And it's a great way to kind of mitigate that first response, which a lot of writers have, a lot of students have, which is what do I write about? I don't know what to write about. That
Yeah,
thing that's at hand, yeah, or at foot in that case.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the trick is to try and connect them to some part of their life that really makes all the bells and whistles go off, so that when they're writing, they can connect to that. But that's not always easy. Writing teachers, if you're out there, God bless you.
Yep. Definitely, definitely. And there's a vulnerability in it too. I had to get to that place as a writing teacher of I'm going to write with you and I'm going to show you the process. And sometimes I might have to go back and, God forbid, change a word or revise in front of my students. It's that kind of that non-reality, that fiction of instant perfection that I think sometimes people have about writing, which is, it just has to appear that way. No,
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, I'm glad I don't feel that way because I would never get anything done, because I just put whatever is coming out and then I go back and make it better and then I change it. And yeah, but your point about being vulnerable as a teacher is so true, because when I've done those writing workshops and the teachers do it too, and then they read what they wrote, I mean, that's hard to do as a teacher, because you're trying, you have a certain persona in the classroom, but if you become vulnerable like that, I think the kids get really a lot out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And being part of we mentioned at the beginning that community of learning, of ways to connect around the written word, and it's a great way to do that.
Yeah.
I always like to round up by saying, did I miss anything? If there's anything that I missed that you want to share about, I want to give space to that. But also, I like to talk about upcoming works. I know you have a co-authored book with someone named Catherine Applegate.
Can you imagine? Yes.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yes. That is coming out in September. It's called Dogtown. It is about a dog shelter that is for strays and misbehaving dogs and also discarded robot dogs. And it's about a robot dog and a flesh and blood dog who both want to figure out a way to get back home. And I had never written a book with another person before, and I wasn't sure that I was a good candidate for that because a lot of opinions. But it turned out to be an absolute blast. I mean, really a joy in every way. I mean, partly, Catherine Applegate is just such a lovely and encouraging person. So I was really fortunate in that. But it was just fun to have someone to bounce ideas off of, like, I'm not sure what happens next here. And getting it back. It's a really fun book anyway, and was illustrated by Wallace West, and he did just a great job with the illustrations. So that really added a lot of fun, to the process, because oh my God, that's metalhead, who knew?
Right.
So that was fun. And I have another novel that's coming out in 2024 called The 10th Mistake of Hank Hooperman. So
Love the title.
And then Al Capone Does My Shirts I've just finished the graphic novels of a script for that. So that's going to be a while before it comes out because they don't even have an illustrator or artist yet. But so I've been busy.
Awesome. And I'm a big comics and graphic novel advocate as well. So very excited about seeing that out in the world.
Yeah, it was really, really fun to do the script, because there are things that you can do with that much visual, kind of visual imagery that you can't when you're writing. And there are things that you can't do in the graphic novel. And so I could show things that I couldn't exactly show in the the novel. It was really interesting process. Because there's like a patterning that happens to the images that has a build to it, that you of course there's patterning in when you write too, but it's very different. So it was really fun.
Awesome. And they look like movie scripts. I've seen just a few comics sort of scripts, and it's like, oh, it really taps into that visual. So looking forward to that, looking forward to your co-authored book, and I always look forward to your work.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Well, I
absolutely.
really appreciate you inviting me, and teachers out there, I think whatever it is that you like, roses, chocolate, I don't know, but you deserve it after going through the pandemic and teaching through the pandemic, because I think
Absolutely.
that was just so hard to all of a sudden overnight have to put all of your curriculum online and do all your classes that way. So a big virtual hug to all of you.
Yeah, I'm sending virtual hugs as well, and it's not an easy job, even in a face-to-face unmasked setting. So, yeah, teachers are absolutely heroes by all means.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you don't get paid nearly enough, by the way.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah.
Write your congressman. Um,
Okay.
all right. Well, thank you so much for a
Okay.
wonderful conversation.
All right. Thank you.